Nelson Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, in a small village called Mvizo in South Africa. His world was quiet, green, and full of stories told by elders around the fire. As a boy, he learned respect, courage, and the meaning of community. But far beyond his village, a cruel system was growing. It was called Apartheid. This system said that people with white skin were more important than people with black skin. Black children like Nelson could not go anywhere they wanted. They could not vote. They could not dream freely. When Nelson grew older, he went to school and later to university. He was smart and curious. He studied law because he wanted to understand rules and power. In the cities, he saw injustice with his own eyes. Black families were pushed out of their homes. Police treated them with fear and violence. Nelson felt anger, but also purpose. He knew silence would change nothing. In 1944, he joined the African National Congress, known as the ANC. It was a group fighting peacefully for equal rights. Nelson believed words and unity could defeat hate. He marched, organized meetings, and spoke to crowds. With every step, danger followed him. The government watched him closely. Still, Nelson stood tall. He was no longer just a village boy. He was becoming a voice for millions who had none. By the late 1940s, apartheid became law in South Africa. Signs appeared everywhere. Whites only, non-Europeans. These words cut deep. Nelson Mandela was now a young lawyer in Johannesburg. He opened the first black law firm with his friend Oliver Tambo. Every day, frightened people came to them. They had been beaten, arrested, or forced from their land. Nelson listened carefully. He felt their pain and carried it with him. The ANC decided peaceful protests were not enough. The government answered kindness with clubs and guns. Nelson helped create the ANC Youth League. They wanted action, energy, and courage. They planned boycotts and strikes. In 1952, Nelson led the Defiance Campaign. Thousands broke unfair laws on purpose. They entered forbidden areas and refused to carry passes. The prisons filled fast. Nelson was arrested again and again. Each time, he returned stronger. The government banned him from meetings and speeches. Police followed him everywhere. Yet his name spread across the country. To many black South Africans, he became a symbol of hope. In 1956, Nelson and many others were charged with treason. The trial lasted years. The courtroom was tense and heavy. But Nelson did not break. He smiled, joked, and stayed calm. Even in chains, he believed freedom would come. He knew the road ahead was dark, but he was ready to walk it. In 1960, everything changed. On March 21st, police opened fire on peaceful protesters in Sharpeville. 69 people were killed. Many were shot in the back. The world watched in shock. South Africa burned with anger and fear. The government declared a state of emergency. The ANC was banned. Peaceful protests seemed to have failed. Nelson Mandela faced a hard choice. He hated violence, but he hated injustice more. After deep thought, he helped form Umkhonto weSizwe, meaning Spear the Nation. This group planned acts of sabotage, not against people, but against buildings and systems of apartheid. Nelson believed this would force the government to listen. He went into hiding. The newspapers called him the Black Pimpernel. He moved from place to place, always careful. In secret, he traveled outside South Africa to gain support. But danger was closing in. In August 1962, Nelson was captured by police. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. While he was locked away, police found secret documents at a farm called Rivonia. Nelson and others were charged with trying to overthrow the government. The punishment could be death. In court, Nelson stood tall. On April 20th, 1964, he gave a speech that shook the world. He said he fought for a free society and was ready to die for it. The room was silent. The judges sent him to prison for life. The long night had begun. Nelson Mandela was sent to Robben Island, a cold prison surrounded by sea. He became prisoner for 66/64. The number meant he was the 466th prisoner in 1964. His cell was small and bare. He slept on the floor. Guards treated him harshly. They tried to break his spirit. Every day, prisoners worked in a limestone quarry under the hot sun. The white dust burned their eyes and lungs. Talking was forbidden. Complaints were punished. But Nelson did not give up. He spoke calmly, even to cruel guards. Slowly, respect grew. In prison, Nelson became a teacher. He shared knowledge and listened to others. The prisoners called the place the University of Robben Island. They debated politics and dreamed of freedom. Nelson learned patience. He learned control. He learned that hate only creates more hate. Years passed. Outside, South Africa was changing. Protests grew. The world began to speak out against apartheid. Inside prison, Nelson aged. His hair turned gray. He missed his children growing up. He lost his mother and son without being allowed to attend their funerals. The pain was deep. Still, Nelson chose hope. He believed his suffering had meaning. He believed South Africa could change without revenge. Behind bars, a future president was being shaped not by power, but by endurance and forgiveness. By the 1980s, apartheid was cracking. The economy was weak. Protests filled the streets. Countries placed sanctions on South Africa. The government realized Nelson Mandela was too powerful to ignore. Even in prison, his name carried weight. Secret talks began. Officials visited Nelson quietly. They offered him freedom if he rejected the struggle. He refused. Freedom without equality meant nothing. He stayed firm, even as his health failed. On February 11, 1990, after 27 years in prison, Nelson Mandela walked free. He held his wife Winnie's hand as the world watched. He did not raise his fist in anger. He smiled. His voice was calm. He spoke of peace and unity. South Africa stood on the edge of chaos. Many feared civil war, but Nelson chose reconciliation. He worked with President F.W. de Klerk to end apartheid laws. In 1994, South Africa held its first democratic election. Black and white citizens voted together. Nelson Mandela became the first black president of South Africa on May 10, 1994. The prisoner had become a leader. He promised to heal a broken nation, not through revenge, but through understanding. His journey was not just about freedom. It was about choosing humanity over hatred. And his story was far from over. Nelson Mandela's first days as a free man felt unreal. Cameras followed him everywhere. Crowds sang and cried when they saw him. But Nelson knew freedom was fragile. South Africa was still divided by fear. Many white citizens worried they would lose everything. Many black citizens wanted revenge for years of pain. One wrong move could lead to violence. Nelson returned to the ANC as its leader. He traveled across South Africa, speaking in simple words. He asked people to stay calm. He asked them to believe in tomorrow. His message was clear. Freedom must include everyone or it would fail. Some were angry with him. They said he was too soft. But Nelson remembered prison. He knew anger burns a person who holds it. In 1991, apartheid laws began to fall. Segregation ended. Banned groups were allowed again. Yet danger was everywhere. Political killings increased. Townships burned at night. Nelson worked without rest. He met leaders, workers, and families who had lost loved ones. He listened more than he spoke. Behind closed doors, talks with the government were tense. Trust was thin as glass. Still, Nelson kept pushing forward. He believed South Africa could surprise the world. He believed enemies could become partners. Each step was slow and risky, but history was moving. The long road from prison was turning into a road toward a nation reborn. In 1993, South Africa stood at a crossroads. Talks nearly collapsed many times. Violence threatened every agreement. When a popular leader, Chris Hani, was killed, the country shook with anger. People filled the streets. Fear of civil war returned. Many expected Nelson Mandela to call for revenge. Instead, he went on television. His voice was steady. He spoke to the nation like a father speaks to frightened children. He asked for calm. He asked for unity. His words stopped the country from exploding. In that moment, many people truly saw his strength. That same year, Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk received the Nobel Peace Prize. The world honored them for choosing peace over bloodshed. Nelson accepted the prize not for himself, but for South Africa. He said it belonged to every person who had suffered under apartheid. Preparation for elections began. For the first time, all races would vote together. Lines were expected to be long. Doubt was high. Some thought it would fail. Nelson believed the people were ready. At rallies, he reminded citizens of the past, but he did not let them live in it. He spoke of schools, jobs, and dignity. He spoke of a flag that belonged to everyone. Hope was no longer a dream whispered in secret. It was becoming a public promise. April 1994 arrived with tension in the air. On election day, people woke before sunrise. They stood in lines that stretched for miles. Old men leaned on sticks. Mothers carried babies on their backs. Some had waited their whole lives for this moment. Nelson Mandela voted for the first time at age 75. When he dropped his paper into box, history changed forever. There was no chaos, no war, just patience and quiet joy. The world watched in awe. When the results were announced, the ANC had won. On May 10, 1994, Nelson Mandela became president. Leaders from around the world attended his inauguration. Former enemies sat side by side. Fighter jets flew overhead, once symbols of fear, now symbols of unity. Nelson spoke simply. He thanked those who suffered and those who chose peace. He promised a nation where no child would be judged by skin color. He promised freedom, not just from chains, but from fear. As president, Nelson surprised many. He invited former prison guards to dinner. He wore the jersey of the national rugby team, once hated by black citizens. He understood symbols mattered. He showed that forgiveness was not weakness. It was power. South Africa began healing, slowly and painfully. The journey was hard, but the impossible had already happened. A prisoner had become a president. President Mandela knew freedom without truth would not last. South Africa needed to face its past. In 1995, he supported the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Victims spoke of pain. Perpetrators confessed their crimes. Tears filled rooms. Some stories were hard to hear, but silence was harder. Nelson believed truth could open the door to healing. Not everyone agreed. Some wanted punishment. Others wanted to forget. Nelson stood in the middle. He believed justice and forgiveness could walk together. During his presidency, he focused on unity. He visited poor villages and wealthy suburbs. He spoke to children about education. He reminded leaders that power was a duty, not a reward. His smile became known around the world, but his work was heavy. South Africa still struggled. Poverty did not disappear. Crime remained. Nelson did not pretend he had all the answers. He listened. He learned. He encouraged young leaders to rise. After one term, Nelson made a rare choice. He stepped down in 1999. He believed leadership should pass on. He did not cling to power. Instead, he set an example. The man who once lived in a cell now walked freely across the world, respected by all. Yet, he never forgot where he came from. His story was never about him alone. It was about a nation learning to stand. In his later years, Nelson Mandela became a global symbol of courage and peace. He spoke against injustice everywhere. He worked to fight poverty and disease, especially HIV/AIDS. Even when his body grew weak, his voice remained strong. He spent time with his family, though many years had been stolen from them. He laughed easily. He listened deeply. He reminded young people that change begins with choice. He told them freedom must be protected every day. On December 5, 2013, Nelson Mandela passed away at the age of 95. South Africa stood still. The world mourned. Bells rang. Candles burned. People remembered not just his struggle, but his kindness. Nelson Mandela showed that one person can face a cruel system and not become cruel in return. He proved that patience can defeat power and love can defeat hate. His life was not a fairy tale. It was hard, painful, and real. From a small village to a prison cell, from prisoner to president, his journey reshaped history. His story lives on in every voice that speaks for justice without violence. Nelson Mandela did not just change South Africa, he changed how the world understands strength. True strength, he showed, is choosing humanity, even when the world gives you every reason not to. After leaving the presidency, Nelson Mandela did not disappear. Many leaders step away and rest, but Nelson believed his work was not finished. He became an elder voice for peace. When countries faced conflict, they called him. When people lost hope, they listened to him. His words were gentle, but they carried weight. Nelson spent time speaking to young people. He believed children held the future of South Africa and the world. He told them education was the strongest weapon against injustice. He reminded them that anger is easy, but understanding takes courage. In schools and community halls, children listened closely. They saw not a hero from books, but a grandfather who cared. He also spoke openly about HIV and AIDS. At a time when many leaders stayed silent, Nelson chose honesty. He talked about loss, pain, and the need for care. When his own son died from AIDS-related illness, he shared his grief with the world. He wanted to break shame and fear. Even as age slowed him, Nelson's presence remained powerful. His smile still brought comfort. His calm still lowered tension. He showed that leadership does not end with office. It lives in service. The struggle that shaped him never left his heart. He carried South Africa with him wherever he went. His fight had changed form, but not purpose. Nelson Mandela often spoke about memory. He believed a nation must remember its past to build a better future. He warned South Africans not to forget apartheid, not to reopen wounds, but to learn from them. Forgetting, he said, allows injustice to return. He supported museums, history projects, and education programs. Robben Island became a place of learning, not fear. Visitors walked through prison cells and felt the weight of history. Nelson wanted the island to teach truth, not bitterness. Around the world, statues of Mandela rose. Streets were named after him. Songs were written in his honor. But Nelson remained humble. He said he was not a saint. He said he was a man who kept trying, even when he failed. At home, South Africa still faced challenges. Inequality remained deep. Some people felt disappointed. Nelson understood this pain. He reminded them that freedom is a long journey, not a single moment. Change takes time, patience, and honesty. When violence appeared, he spoke against it. When leaders forgot the people, he spoke again. His voice was softer now, but it still mattered. Nelson Mandela's life became a lesson written in actions, not words alone. He showed that remembering the past is not a chain. It is a guide. As the years passed, Nelson Mandela appeared less in public. His health declined, and his steps slowed. Still, whenever he appeared, the world paid attention. A short wave from him could move hearts. A brief message could calm nations. South Africans celebrated his birthdays as days of service. People cleaned streets, helped neighbors, and fed the hungry. They called it Mandela Day. Nelson loved this idea. He believed small acts could change the world more than speeches. He spent quiet days with family, reflecting on his long life. He spoke about regret and forgiveness. He admitted mistakes. He said leadership means learning, even at old age. This honesty made people trust him even more. Nelson never claimed victory over apartheid alone. He honored the many who suffered and died. He spoke of unnamed heroes, brave women, and fearless youth. He said his story belonged to them too. When asked about fear, he gave a simple answer. Courage, he said, is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward anyway. These words echoed far beyond South Africa. Though his voice grew weak, his message stayed strong. The fight for dignity, equality, and peace did not end with him. He knew that, and he prepared the world to continue without him. On the day Nelson Mandela died, South Africa stood together in silence. Rich and poor, young and old, black and white, many cried openly. Churches rang bells. People sang freedom songs softly. The air felt heavy with memory. World leaders gathered to honor him. They spoke of his strength, his patience, and his forgiveness. But ordinary people told the most powerful stories. They spoke of hope returning after despair. They spoke of fear replaced by courage. In villages, elders told children about a man who chose peace when anger was easier. In cities, murals appeared on walls. His face became a reminder of what is possible. Nelson Mandela's life taught the world that justice does not need revenge. He showed that enemies can sit together. He proved that power can serve, not control. His journey from prisoner to president was real, painful, and earned. South Africa was not perfect after him, but it was changed forever. A door had opened. A path had been cleared. The nation had seen what moral leadership looked like. Nelson Mandela did not promise an easy future. He promised a possible one. And that promise still lives in every person who chooses courage over hate and unity over fear. Nelson Mandela's story continues long after his death. It lives in classrooms, streets, and conversations. It lives whenever someone stands up against injustice without losing their humanity. His life became a mirror, asking the world a simple question: what will you choose? He showed that suffering does not have to harden the heart. It can open it. 27 years in prison could have broken him. Instead, it shaped him into a bridge between enemies. That choice changed history. For children, Mandela's life is a lesson in bravery. For leaders, it is a lesson in humility. For nations, it is a lesson in healing. He did not win with weapons. He won with patience, truth, and forgiveness. The apartheid system was powerful. It had laws, guns, and fear. Nelson Mandela had none of these. He had belief. He had discipline. He had love for his people. In the end, that was stronger. His journey reminds us that freedom is not given. It is built slowly by people who refuse to give up. People who believe tomorrow can be better than today. Nelson Mandela's voice may be silent, but his message speaks loudly. A single life, lived with courage and kindness, can change the direction of the world. Nelson Mandela's life became a guide for people far beyond South Africa. In countries struggling with racism and injustice, his name was spoken with respect. Teachers use his story to explain courage. Parents use it to teach patience. His journey showed that change can begin with one clear choice. Many young South Africans were born after apartheid ended. They did not see the signs, the passes, or the fear. Nelson wanted them to understand freedom without feeling trapped by pain. He told them, "You are free to build, not to hate." He believed the next generation must carry hope, not anger. Books, films, and songs shared his story. Yet, Nelson reminded everyone that heroes are human. He said he felt fear many times. He doubted himself. What mattered was not perfection, but persistence. He kept moving forward, even when the road was dark. Around the world, people visited South Africa to see the places that shaped him. They walked through his village. They stood outside his prison cell. These places became silent teachers, showing the cost of freedom. Nelson Mandela's life asked the world to slow down and listen, to choose peace when anger feels easier, to choose unity when division feels safer. His story did not belong to history alone. It belonged to every moment where justice is tested. Long before he became famous, Nelson Mandela learned leadership from African tradition. As a boy, he watched elders sit in a circle. Everyone spoke. No one interrupted. Decisions were made together. That lesson stayed with him forever. Even as president, Nelson listened more than he talked. He believed leadership meant service. When people complained, he did not push them away. He asked questions. He wanted to understand their pain. This approach helped calm a nation filled with old wounds. Culture mattered deeply to him. He respected languages, customs, and beliefs. He encouraged South Africans to celebrate who they were. Music, dance, and storytelling became tools of healing. These traditions reminded people they shared more than they realized. Nelson also understood symbols. When he smiled, it was not by accident. When he shook hands with former enemies, it sent a message. He knew that small acts could carry big meaning. Through culture and respect, Nelson helped rebuild trust. He showed that unity does not erase differences. It protects them. His leadership did not erase the past. It placed it where it could teach, not control. This wisdom, rooted in African values, helped guide a nation through its hardest chapter, and it remains a lesson for the world today. Nelson Mandela often spoke about time. He said change rarely happens quickly. Many people want results overnight. But Nelson knew deep change moves slowly, like roots growing underground. Apartheid had taken decades to build. Healing would take time too. Some criticized him for moving too slowly. Others said he forgave too easily. Nelson listened, but he stayed firm. He believed rushing peace could destroy it. He believed forgiveness without truth was empty. Balance was everything. During his life, he met world leaders, celebrities, and activists. Yet he treated everyone the same. A child mattered as much as a president. This equality made people feel seen. It made them trust him. Nelson also spoke about responsibility. Freedom, he said, comes with duty. People must protect it. They must speak when others are silent. They must stand when others fall. He warned that freedom can be lost if taken for granted. His message was simple enough for children to understand, yet deep enough for leaders to study. That was his gift. He made hard truths feel reachable. Nelson Mandela did not promise an easy road. He promised a meaningful one, and he walked it step by step so others could follow. As years passed, Nelson Mandela became part of the world's shared conscience. When injustice appeared, people asked, what would Mandela do? His life became a moral compass pointing toward dignity and peace. In South Africa, his image appeared in schools and public spaces, not as a reminder of power, but of responsibility. Teachers use his story to explain fairness. Parents use it to teach respect. Children learn that strength can be gentle. Nelson believed the fight against racism was global. He supported movements that called for equality everywhere. He spoke against discrimination in all forms. His struggle was local, but his message was universal. Even those who once opposed him admitted respect. Former enemies said he treated them with dignity. This did not erase the past, but it changed the future. His forgiveness made space for growth. Nelson Mandela's life showed that justice and mercy can exist together. That truth does not have to be cruel. That leadership does not need fear. His story continues to guide conversations about freedom, fairness, and peace. It reminds the world that change begins when one person decides to act with courage and compassion. Nelson Mandela's journey is now part of human history. It is taught not as a myth, but as a real story shaped by hard choices. A boy from a small village faced one of the strongest systems of injustice and did not lose himself. He taught the world that prisons cannot hold ideas. That time cannot erase truth. That forgiveness can rebuild what hate destroys. These lessons remain alive because they are needed. Every generation faces its own struggles. The systems may change, but the need for courage stays the same. Nelson Mandela's life offers a map, not a shortcut. It shows that change is possible, but never free. When people stand up for what is right, his spirit lives on. When leaders choose service over power, his example speaks. When communities choose unity over fear, his dream continues. Nelson Mandela once said that freedom is not just removing chains, but living in a way that respects others. That idea now belongs to the world. His story is not finished. It continues in every act of kindness, every peaceful protest, and every brave voice. From struggle to hope, from prison to presidency, his life remains a light in dark times. Nelson Mandela believed stories shape the future. He knew how a nation tells its past can either divide or unite its people. That is why he encouraged South Africans to tell their stories honestly. Painful stories, hopeful stories, true stories. He believed truth was stronger than silence. In community halls and schools, people shared memories of apartheid. Some spoke of loss, some spoke of fear, others spoke of courage. These stories helped people see each other not as enemies, but as humans who had suffered differently. Mandela believed listening was a first step toward healing. He often reminded the nation that freedom did not erase responsibility. Democracy, he said, only works when people protect it. Voting once was not enough. Citizens had to stay aware, active, and kind. Freedom could fade if people stopped caring. Nelson also spoke about leadership after him. He warned against corruption and greed. He said leaders must never forget who they serve. Power, he believed, should never rise above the people. Even when he was no longer strong, his advice remained clear. Build bridges, not walls. Choose fairness over comfort. Choose unity over pride. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a life lived fully. He did not speak from theory. He spoke from experience. And South Africa listened. Nelson Mandela's connection to Africa was deep and proud. He believed the continent held great strength, history, and wisdom. He spoke against the idea that Africa was weak or broken. He said its people were rich in spirit and resilience. He supported peace efforts in other African nations. When conflicts rose, he offered guidance. He believed Africans must help one another heal. His voice carried respect because it was rooted in sacrifice. Mandela also challenged the world's view of Africa. He wanted stories of progress, not only pain. He encouraged investment in education, health, and leadership. He believed Africa's future belonged to its youth. At home, he reminded South Africans that their freedom was part of a larger African struggle. Many nations had fought colonial rule and injustice. Their stories were connected. Nelson often wore traditional clothing during important events. This was not fashion. It was identity. He wanted young Africans to feel proud of who they were. His love for Africa did not mean ignoring its problems. It meant believing they could be solved. He believed dignity was not borrowed from others. It was owned through his actions. Mandela reminded the world that Africa was not just a place of struggle. It was a place of leadership, courage, and hope. As time moved forward, the name Nelson Mandela became larger than one man. It became an idea that justice can win without hate, that peace can be built without forgetting truth. Many people tried to copy his image, but Mandela warned against blind praise. He said people should not follow him, but the values he lived by: honesty, courage, respect. These mattered more than statues. He believed ordinary people create real change. Teachers, workers, parents, students. He said heroes are often quiet and unseen. His own life, he insisted, was shaped by many hands. Mandela encouraged people to ask hard questions. Why are some people still poor? Why does inequality remain? Freedom, he said, must reach homes, not just laws. His honesty kept conversations alive. He also believed laughter was important. Even after prison, he laughed easily. He joked. He smiled. Joy, he believed, was part of resistance. It reminded people what they were fighting for. Nelson Mandela's life balanced seriousness with warmth, strength with kindness, discipline with joy. This balance made his message human and lasting. He did not ask the world to be perfect. He asked it to be better, step by step, choice by choice. Nelson Mandela's legacy is often spoken about, but it is also lived. It lives when people stand against racism. It lives when leaders choose peace over pride. It lives when communities listen instead of attack. In South Africa, his image watches over busy streets and quiet schools. But his true presence is found in actions, not pictures. When people vote, when they forgive, when they speak up for others. Mandela knew that progress could move backward if people were careless. He warned that freedom requires protection. Democracy, he said, is fragile. It must be cared for like a living thing. He also reminded the world that justice is never finished. Each generation must carry the work forward. His struggle ended apartheid, but the fight for equality continues everywhere. Nelson Mandela did not leave instructions carved in stone. He left principles. These principles adapt to time and place. They guide without controlling. His story is often told as extraordinary, and it is. But its power comes from simple choices repeated over time. Choosing courage, choosing patience, choosing humanity. In this way, Mandela did not just change history. He offered a way to face it. Nelson Mandela's journey began in a small village and echoed across the world. It moved through fear, prison walls, and long years of waiting. It ended not in anger, but in peace. That is why it matters. His life teaches that injustice can be challenged without becoming unjust, that enemies can learn to sit together, that forgiveness can be stronger than revenge. For children, his story says, your voice matters. For adults, it says, your choices matter. For leaders, it says, serve, do not rule. Mandela never claimed to be fearless. He admitted fear walked beside him, but courage, he said, was walking anyway. That simple idea carried him through decades of struggle. Today, the world still faces division, hatred, and inequality. Mandela's story does not erase these problems. It lights a path through them. He once said that after climbing a great hill, one finds there are many more hills to climb. Nelson Mandela's life stands as one of the greatest journeys ever lived. From a quiet village to a prison cell, from prisoner to president, his path was shaped by courage, patience, and belief. He faced a system built on fear and inequality. He could have answered it with anger. Instead, he answered it with humanity. That choice changed a nation and inspired the world. His story teaches that justice does not need violence to win, that forgiveness does not erase truth, that leadership means lifting others, not standing above them. Mandela showed that even in the darkest places, light can survive, that even after long suffering, healing is possible, that one life, lived with purpose, can move history. For children, his story says, you matter. For adults, it says, your choices matter. For the world, it says, change is possible. Nelson Mandela did not promise an easy future. He promised a fairer one, if people were willing to work for it together. His journey reminds us that freedom is not a gift handed down. It is a responsibility carried forward. And as long as people choose dignity over hate, Nelson Mandela's story will never end.